The Trump administration says the new tax on imports is aimed at pushing other countries to keep goods made with forced labor out of their supply chains. Canadian law already does that, but U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer claims that the federal government isn't doing enough to enforce it.
Really going into each of these countries, and we're not assessing whether they have forced labor in their borders. What we're trying to do is we're trying to stop trade in those types of goods. In 2018, when we redid NAFTA, one of the new provisions we forced Canada and Mexico to take was their own prohibition on forced labor. So in USMCA, we obligated them to do that. A few years later, we're finding that they aren't actually enforcing that. So they're included in this action. We're not in favor of sweatshops, and we don't want anyone else to be in favor of it either.
And I want to bring in now William Pellerin. He's an international trade lawyer at Macmillan LLP to help us make sense of what is happening and what's been announced overnight. And before I get to the meat of the conversation, William, I want to ask you, I mean, it does feel like there is no pleasing the Trump administration, that countries are being asked to do things, they do that thing, and then there's another rationale that's announced for another set of tariffs. What do you make of that strategy?
I think that's exactly right. Ultimately, and I've said this before, the U.S. administration is forcing countries to play whack-a-mole a little bit. But one tariff goes away, a new one takes its place. And let's, Canadians ought to know that what happened is that there's this new tariff that goes in place to offset alleged forced labor in our supply chains. But that coincides with the old 10% tariff that is actually expiring, that actually expired last night also. So one tariff goes away and a new one replaces it on the very same day with a different justification. And so a lot of that is to make sure that the U.S. abides by U.S. laws. Some of these tariff measures that they put in place had time-limited ability to stay in place. So the tariff that went away had a 150-day maximum. So that one disappears. And like magic, of course, there's a new tariff that appears with a different rationale the very same day.
And William, there does seem to be this fast and furious scramble to try to make sense of all of this, but I want to slow it down for just a second and try to understand some of the details of this new announcement, starting with that forced labor rationale behind these new global tariffs. So what exactly is forced labor from a legal standpoint, and how does it differ from coerced labor?
Yeah, so forced labor and coerced labor are very similar. In fact, the definition, the international definition around forced labor is labor that is not given voluntarily. And so if a party is coerced into giving that labor or in some way cannot escape that labor, for example, in parts of the world where there's a lot of migrant labor, they have to give up their passports or they have to put up significant amounts of money that doesn't allow them to continue, or if their family members are under threat if they don't participate in that labor, that all falls under the definition of forced labor. The U.S. takes a very, very aggressive enforcement approach to forced labor. And the way that they do that is they create this reverse onus, meaning you have to prove to us that when your goods are from certain parts of China, for example, where there's alleged to be forced labor, you have to prove to us that there isn't forced labor that made its way into those products. And that's a very bold move. So it's a very aggressive stance, primarily aimed at China. And what the United States is effectively saying is anyone who doesn't take that same very aggressive approach to Chinese-made goods, or goods made from the Xinjiang region of China, Western China, that is the alleged hotbed of forced labor globally, we're going to hit you with a tariff. And so that's what they've done. It's not that Canada doesn't have laws, because again, Canada does also prohibit forced labor, goods made from forced labor from coming to Canada. But the United States has really taken this very strong approach of saying, you prove to us that there isn't forced labor or your goods don't come in. And that's what they want Canada to do.
And what would that entail? I mean, we just heard from an EU representative saying that our labor laws are solid. Her claim is that it's even better than the United States. I think many in this country are probably thinking, we didn't think this was an issue in this country. What does it entail to try to prove to this Trump administration that you're in compliance?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. So one of the things about the EU response is that they've got it backwards. It's the U.S. administration is not saying there's forced labor in the EU, and they're not saying that there's forced labor in Canada. What they're saying is EU and Canada, you have to be tougher on China. This is all code for you have to be tougher on China, and you have to have stronger border measures to prevent goods from parts of China from coming to your country. And so that's what they're saying. And so the way to fix that is what Canada has already just proposed. There's a bill through Parliament today. It was introduced a few weeks ago, called Bill C-35. And it will basically match what the U.S. has. So an additional requirement at the border that will be imposed in Canada to stop goods that are allegedly from, for example, regions of China or types of products that are known to sometimes contain forced labor. So you have to just have stricter border measures to please the United States on this. Now, is there truly pleasing the United States if we do this? To your early point, is that going to be enough? It would certainly please them and do exactly what they want on this. But the question is, would there be another layer of tariffs that will simply follow later?
And William, the White House said these tariffs are a response to discriminatory trade practices from Canada's part. Do you think that will hold up legally?
Yeah, so that's the other set of very large tariffs, right? So there's the 10% tariffs on forced labor. Those are actually not going to be too painful for Canada because they do exempt goods that are made that have North American content that meet the rules of origin of our trade agreement. So if they're North American made, they actually will not have to pay that 10%, that forced labor 10% tariff. So that's actually quite good news and really doesn't affect too many Canadian exporters. But the other tariff that was announced, and it's enough to give your head a bit of a spin here, but the other tariff that was recently announced on Canada alone, this 50% tariff on a wide range of products, including hockey sticks and honey and agricultural products, but also furniture and electronics and apparel. Now that's a 50% tariff, and that one, there is no exemption. So even if your good is 100% made in Canada even from US parts, that doesn't matter. Our exporters are getting hit with a 50% tariff on that list of goods. And that one is entirely devastating. So if you're a furniture manufacturer in Ontario, for example, and you're shipping a product and your clients have been in the United States for 50 years, overnight you have to pay a 50% tariff. I'm going to tell you, and we're talking to some of our clients on this, your sales are going to zero. No one can afford to pay a 50% tariff on those goods, and that's devastating for Canadians.
And William, do you see something here with this argument, or do you see that it's simply the Trump administration looking for new laws as an excuse for new tariffs? I mean, you touched on this already, and if maybe I could ask you to put yourself in the shoes of somebody advising the Trump administration, what exactly is the strategy here?
So this additional threat of that new 50% tariff, the one that is really catastrophic or might be catastrophic for large parts of kind of our furniture industry or apparel or electronics that ship to the United States. Clearly, the United States is using that as a point of leverage to force Canada back to the negotiation table and to force additional concessions on Canada. And so, and that's a big threat, and it really does mean that Canada can no longer kind of slow play a little bit. Not that Canada was really trying to slow play the negotiations, but now we're really forced to make some big decisions in terms of the types of things that we will need to concede on that the United States wants out of Canada and has wanted for a long time. So otherwise, there's going to be some major parts of the economy that will actually hurt hard.
And then just tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from some of the businesses that you're working with.
Yeah. So we heard the word catastrophic actually from a client recently, a large wood product manufacturer in Quebec that has multiple facilities. That's the term that they used for this new 50% tariff. So this is a company like many, many others that has been, selling into the United States for decades. And they have long-standing relationships, and sure, they sell into Canada to some degree also, but the US market will always be very, very important. And same for furniture, for example. Like if you're in Manitoba selling furniture, a lot of that is going to the United States, into Chicago area and central United States and throughout, right? And you can't pivot overnight to selling that product into Europe or Asia. And so if you've been selling, what we've already heard is that US customers, those clients of those Canadian manufacturers, are already stopping their orders, right? Because even though that new 50% tariff is a threat and won't go into place until August 19th, those clients, if you're a US retailer, you can't take the chance of paying 50% a month from now on those goods once they cross. You immediately have to put a halt to those orders. And so the order book is already drying up for Canadian manufacturers. And we're already hearing from clients that they're going to shutter their facilities, their plants. And we'll have to do rotating layoffs or something of the sort. And they're trying to figure that out right now. So these measures are absolutely real, and they're absolutely devastating, particularly for small towns across rural Canada, where often, the big furniture plant or the big wood processing facility is the only employer or major employer in that town. And so one of our clients said, but if I shut down this facility, I'm shutting down the whole town. Mm-hmm. And that's the true impact of this latest round of tariffs of 50% on Canada.
Yeah. Such insightful perspective there. Thank you so much for that. William Pellerin in Ottawa.